If only.
You have yours there, Father Ganz?
I do. Let me, I will turn it on here if you are ready for that. Yes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started since it's 6:01. I'm gonna mute everyone so we don't have the background noise. And Father Ganz, you can unmute. There you go.
Got it. Yes.
Okay. Let me do a few more mutes. Okay. All right. Welcome everyone to our May Faber Sessions. Good to see you all there in your homes. It is pouring here, thunder and lightning, which is not as typical. So hopefully you won't hear that in the background, but we are definitely having the spring weather this evening. I'm just going to share personally, since at the Faber Institute, we are all about the depth of friendship and relationship and being in the spaces that are real to people's lives. And I'll be a little teary tonight, as I just found out about an hour ago some tough news of a first cousin who has small children and now stage 4 cancer. So as I'm absorbing that tonight, if you see me a little teary on the screen or even step away for a minute, that's where I am in my life right now. And just wanted to bring that to the evening.
Hey, Mary, would you just
Yes.
stop for just a second? And I wonder, Tom, you out there on the walking path, could you just offer a prayer, not only for Mary and what she's feeling right now, but all of us know those experiences that go beyond words, and all there is the silence part and the tears that always know best what to say. But could you just put some words on our behalf and just help us?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. Dear loving God, we gather this evening and we bring all of us our joys and our strengths, our weaknesses, our imperfections. But it seems most natural, Lord, to come to you with our sorrows, with the things that weigh heavy on our heart, and the things that we know that only you can understand and only you have the power to transform. And so as we gather tonight, we give all of ourselves to you, and we especially give Mary, her family, her cousin, that family, Lord, just surround them with this love as this news is new to them. Help them to hear it, to understand it, to absorb it, and through your love, transcend it. And Lord, every one of us would have difficulties and griefs and needs. And Lord, we just ask that you would welcome that part of ourselves as well. That what we hear tonight is not just the voice of Rick, but the voice of God. The truth is slanted towards us and towards our benefit. And so bless all who are here and our friends and brothers and family who are not with us tonight. Your mother knows suffering and sorrow. May her suffering and sorrow be close to ours tonight and transform it to great joy and love and always resurrection for your sister Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
So I'll be here with my Kleenex, and as we're entering into this, we'll see, hopefully we see the beauty in this poetry that we get to explore tonight, wherever it is that we're each coming from. So glad you're here. for our last Faber Sessions of this series. And as always, we'll stay muted until times of when there might be conversation, discussion that Rick will invite us into, and then we can unmute and join in that discussion together. So thank you for your grace and for joining us this evening. And I'll turn it over to Rick now.
Thank you, Mary. What you just demonstrated, Mary, and made it obvious by saying it, is that when each of us come tonight, all of us in our rectangles, that it's never just us. If we had the vision, mystical vision, to be able to look at people and see arrayed around them and behind them all the people that love them, each one of us, who remember us, not because they have to try to remember us, but they're just always present to us in our memory. And our guardian angels that stand sent by God to be with us and help us in our journey. Each one of us is a congregation. I'd love sometime to be able to actually have eyes to see like that, and actually see in this group, it's a much larger group. Mary just showed us that she's bringing big chunks of Texas with her tonight, even as she sits solitary in a window. How it works. Today was the day, May 8th, in the year 1373, when a woman by the name of Julian, well, we don't know her name. She took the name of the patron of a church in the city of Norwich, England, such that she became Julian of Norwich. She just identified herself with the place where she was, because at some point in her life, younger life, she must have had an experience that the most interesting thing that was actually worth listening to in the world really wasn't other people. Maybe that's not a cynical comment, but it's an experience that some people born into the world have a taste for God, a desire to know God, and find that the noise of the world is a constant intrusion that makes it very difficult to hear God, to sense God's movement in the world. We don't know why a woman like this would have left just the whole social setting, what would have been normal, and attached herself literally to the side of a church in Norwich. And a little house, a little piece was built right on the side of the church. And she entered that space and didn't leave it for the rest of her life. She had a little space that she could open and look into the church to be able to see the Eucharist being celebrated each day. And the only other opening, well, I'm sure there was a door, but she never went out of it. There was a window that opened on the street. And for years and years, she was that strange woman who lived in that piece of a building that clung to the side of the church. Her anchor hold, the old Anglo-Saxon word for someone who plants themselves like this, solitude. We call them hermits. Eventually, people gain the impression that this might be a person of great wisdom. And so people would come and knock on the door, the window, the wooden window opening on the street level, and ask if she would pray for them, because they felt, my gosh, if she's in there so long, she must be good at praying. And so they would step by step start coming there, and she would receive and pray for them. And eventually she would give counsel, until eventually she had a regular flow of people coming to her wooden window and knocking on the door and asking for encouragement, a word from God. Well, there came a point on this day in the year 1373 when, over the course of a day and the next day, she received 16 showings, as she calls them, profound experiences of understanding. But it's the way God does understanding, where he gives you an image and a certain degree of understanding of what the image means. But it can be years before a person actually understands what just happened. You know for sure it was important. You realize, I just don't understand it yet. And so she recorded the showings, wrote them down, and then 20 years later, went back and wrote down the same ones and recorded her developed thoughts on those showings. Julian of Norwich, we remember her today and the gift that she received on this day that began a profound journey of reflection that in my book makes her, to me, and we all have our favorites, she's the greatest theologian I have ever experienced. And I've read a lot of them. She's extraordinary. So, through the intercession of Julian of Norwich, who received fervent prayers at her window, pray for you, Mary, and your family, and for any of us who feel like we have things happening in our lives that we need a wooden window to knock on and ask for a good prayer. Today, the poetry of Gerard Manley Hopkins is at the center of our interest. Gerard Manley Hopkins, like Emily Dickinson, like George Herbert, these are people that have been a part of this Faber Sessions, were people whose gift was mostly unknown in their life. And it was only after they died that someone found their poetry and went, oh my goodness, and eventually published it. Emily Dickin's poems, they just thought she dabbled occasionally in poetry, poetic lines. She'd written 1,800 poems that make her one of the two greatest poets that America has ever known. George Herbert, who wasn't even sure of the value of the poetry that he wrote during the last 3 years of his life, when he was filled with cancer and actively dying and in pain for 3 years. That's where his poems came from. And he just entrusted them to a friend and said, if you think there's anything in here that's worth, I'm just going to trust you to do with them what you think. But he truly didn't think they would be worth much. Again, hugely impactful in the world. Gerard Manley Hopkins felt at the end of life that he was a failure. He died at 44 years old. And he was an odd one. Brilliant, quirky, just startling kind of perceptions that other people like, where did that come from? Bright, incredibly intelligent, playful, and odd mannerisms. How often the great ones in the world have been people whose awkwardness puts us off, makes us imagine that they can't be of much worth, just by the way we look at them. Ah, my goodness. So Gerard Manley Hopkins, his life went like this. He was born the first of 9 children into a middle-class family in which literature and being an accomplished person intellectually and in a literary way was encouraged. Families do matter hugely in the cultivation of these love of reading, love and care for words, learning how to converse. This was a priority in the house of Hopkins. He shone early in his studies, wrote some poetry, showed real promise, went through schooling with honors in his early schooling, and eventually earned a chance to go to Oxford, which, as you remember, in the British Empire, Oxford and Cambridge only allow into their buildings, at least in the old days, 1/2 of 1% of all the smart people in the entire British Empire. It was an extremely rare air of talent. And Hopkins earned his way into Balliol College, which was one of the colleges of Oxford. As he entered, he was entering at a time where something called the Oxford movement was happening at Oxford, which was a movement associated with people like now St. John Henry Newman, John Keble, E.B. Pusey, some of these names, famous names, but John Henry Newman at the head of it. Through careful study and deep thinking, noticed that the Anglicanism of their day was hollow, and it didn't strike him that it wasn't the true church, was what he came to. And so the Oxford movement is associated about 12-year period of time at Oxford when Hopkins came. When there was a desire to move from a religion of rituals and doing everything perfectly, but there was a hollowness to it, a lack of historical resonance, and a desire to move to the inner meaning of the church. This appealed quickly and immediately to the young man Hopkins, who felt the inner life and the cultivation of the inner life was the most important thing. Didn't think this was a moral issue, it was just how he was made. He went through and took a first-class degree at Oxford, Sean, but converted to Catholicism, which immediately caused him to lose all career possibilities for his talents at Oxford or Cambridge. Still a deep anti-Catholic bias. He sacrificed all of that. A brilliant career as a teacher of classics, Greek and Latin, and whatever else he wanted. But he converted to Catholicism under the influence of John Henry Newman. And when he left the university, he went to teach in a school that John Henry Newman had founded. During this time, as this conversion continued to happen to him, he got connected with the Jesuits and entered the Jesuit order. And in very brief scope, I will just tell you what it means to be trained as a Jesuit. You enter a novitiate, a seminary, and for 2 years, you're trained the deep work on your interior life, connecting it with theology and scripture and the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, founding experience of the Jesuit order, deep mystical dive. Once you move from the novitiate, you go to philosophy studies, and so did Hopkins. Then after philosophy studies, which is usually 3 or 4 years of intensive study of all of the philosophy, at the end of which you take an examination on all of philosophy, then he went to teach. Because he wasn't a very good teacher, that only lasted a year instead of the usual 3. And then he went to theology studies. That's usually for 3 or 4 years, and you study all of theology, at the end of which is not an exam just on all of theology, but on all of philosophy and all of theology. And that success in that exam is, in the Jesuit order, what wins you if you get first class honors in that exam, that you become part of a stable of those destined to lead the order, the superiors of community, provincials of province. So this was the basic pattern of Gerard Manley Hopkins, patterning of his life. 2 years are important for him. Year 1877, when he was ordained a priest in the year 1887, 1884, somewhere in there. When he would experience much failure in his ministry and write some of his most famous sonnets. Basic bio. I'd like to begin by having you listen to one of his poems. It's a poem called God's Grandeur. It's a sonnet. And I think what I'd like to do is just read it to you first and let you react to what you hear. And what I mean when I react, Hopkins knew that the sound of his poems was crucial. And so even if you don't understand words, like what does that word mean? Probably just as important is how the word sounds. He's after a musicality, a rhythm, a sound in the words. And I can help you with the words if you don't know what they mean. So I want to read it and let you react. What's its effect in you when you hear it? Is there a line that you found beautiful? Something that interests you? Poem goes like this. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crush. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with, bright wing. I can pop this up on the share screen if I want. Let me ask you first, even though this is in some ways the last thing that would interest Hopkins, what in general is this poem about? How would you say it? Mary, I'll trust you to bring people in. Do you notice the contrast in the poem between a way of seeing the world that Hopkins, as a poet, wants you to see it like he is? A world that's charged with the grandeur of God. In contrast to a world in which our heads are down, we're working, we're trotting, working in our work, doing it what we needs to be done, and kind of like worker ants. And it's as if the same world is two worlds. In way of perception. When it says the world is charged with the grandeur of God, the word charge means to place a load on something. Like you would place a load on a tractor, on a beast that would be carrying a heavy burden. It's not charged like electricity, though it can have that feel. It's charged and said, the reason the world exists is to carry the very grandeur of God who created the world. That's its purpose, is to carry God's grandeur and make it available to us. But we don't always see it like a flash. Like Mary said today, we've had lightning and it's been flashing. It flames out, and then he uses the analogy of taking like foil, almost like tin foil, and it's crumpled and you put it in the light and it flashes in different ways. He's trying to say, have you noticed this before? That occasionally something powerful, something beautiful will flash. And for a second you catch it and maybe have this intake of breath like, oh, so beautiful. And then he says, over time, the grandeur gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Beautiful image, because there's a smoothness about it, like oil poured out, and then you placing pressure on it and it squirts to the side. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Wreck, R-E-C-K, is not W-R-E-C-K. Wreck, as in like to reckon, means to pay attention to pay close attention to something. So Hopkins is saying, once you see the beauty that's in the world, how is it even possible that we not notice the gift? Or in fact, we exploit it for the sake of material goods instead of letting be the gift. So basically he's saying there is, why aren't we afraid? The world doesn't belong to us. It's God who gave it to us to care for. That's just deeply biblical. So why do we exploit it or don't pay attention to it? Have we lost our awareness of the giver? So there's a lament here. Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade. It's all about industry, developing material things is what he's saying. Bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now because we've mowed down the forests, I think is an image. here, but also the air has become so poisonous that it's killed the land. I grew up in Spokane and not far were the great mines in northern Idaho. And the smog was so toxic that it literally killed all the mountains around, all the forests, and it left them bare. So the soil is bare now, nor can foot feel it, because even the foot is covered over, creating distance between the feel of the earth. So he's putting together insight into a world charged, carrying the very glory of God, if we can see it, and how we don't see it. And this hurts the poet. He laments it. Why is this the case? And then, but for all of this, all of our behavior, all our lack of noticing, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down. I want to use this image and see if it's helpful to you. There came fairly early on in the Ganz family a habit of asking questions. I think every parent knows there's a point where a kid will just start, when you say anything, go, why? Go, but why? But why? Just question after question after question. And the way my parents solved that with 6 children, as that habit started to develop, is that whenever one of us said it, and we were old enough now to read, is mom or dad would say, go look it up. And so even if we were in the middle of a dinner that we liked and we had asked a question, dad would turn, let's say, to me and say, well, just go look it up. Well, can I finish no, go look it up. It was a way of disciplining the questions, how we ask questions, when we ask them, and whether we really cared for the answer. So that usually meant we went upstairs to the collection of World Book Encyclopedia and opened it up and found the answer and came back and reported what we found. But one of the things about that encyclopedia that was a fascinating thing, it's the first time I'd ever seen that, is there was a section on the human body that when you opened it up, I don't know if you remember this, where it would have these plastic overlay sheets. And you'd show a human body unclothed, just, like that. And then you'd pull back one of the plastic sheets or whatever they were made out of, and it would take you the next level in from the skin. So you'd see like blood vessels or whatever. Then you turn it again and it would open to all the muscles or whatever comes first. I don't know. But anyway, layer by layer until you got down till it was just a skeleton in front of you. So each of the layers were revealed a part of the human body. What is it that we could know, I could know, you could know, every level of the body and all the systems and the different systems that make the human body work? And yet, that would not give you knowledge of a person. You could know everything about a body, but you could never, that wouldn't mean that you know the person. What is that we know when we know the dearest freshness deep down that makes a particular person that particular person? What is that exactly? what is it that we catch? What is it that we grasp? That is that unique person. It includes all the body and all the systems, but it includes a lot more of that. What is that? Gerard Manley Hopkins had a term for this. He called it inscape. You get the sound scape in words like landscape. Hopkins, above all, was a lover of the natural world, sought to describe it as accurately as he could. Journals are filled with descriptions. What he meant by inscape is that you can talk about daffodils, and I could walk outside and see daffodils at the bottom of the street, at the bottom of my driveway. They're just about done now with their blooming light. But to know daffodils and be able to say that's a daffodil, not a maple tree, is not the same thing as looking at that particular daffodil and describing and being able to perceive the uniqueness of that particular daffodil that sits at the bottom of the drive. Inscape is the ability to grasp the particularity of a particular existent thing. When Gerard Manley Hopkins entered the Jesuit order at 24 years old, he feared that his gift would be something that would compete with God, and so he resolved never to write another poem from the moment he entered the Jesuit order, and he destroyed all the poems he had written up to that point. Fortunately, some of his friends had some of those copies of earlier poems, so we have them. And he didn't write a poem for 7 years, until during his theology study, there was a famous shipwreck, a ship called the Deutschland, that foundered on a sandbar off the coast of England in a winter storm and killed many people on the boat, including 5 nuns who were on there. And the superior, the Jesuit superior in the house, asked Hopkins, said, I think you've shown interest in poetry before. Do you think you could write a little something up in honor of this so that we can read it in the community? This that burst forth from him, the poem, The Wreck of the Deutschland, just was startling how that poured out, a very long poem. And that began his writing again of his career. What he was trying to capture in that poem was let me just pause here. I'm losing a feel for you. And as a teacher, I won't proceed if I lose that feel. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to come back out of the share screen. And I'm going to ask you to this may seem awkward to you. It is a little awkward to me. I'm waiting for the prompting. Going to proceed and read another poem to you by Gerard Manley Hopkins here. I resolved to stay tuned, to wait for the prompting I'm looking for. This poem is called Inversnade. It was written as he stood by a stream near Loch Lomond in Scotland when he was working at a parish. I think he went down to this stream in the early morning because you will hear a reference to steam that comes off the rapids and floats above the surface of the rapids. That's something that usually happens in the morning when there's a temperature differential, or in the evening. But there are other signs in this poem that it's early in the morning. I want you to listen to the musicality of it, and then ask you what you heard. And maybe as you respond to the poem and react to what you hear, I will be helped to understand where I'm supposed to go with it. Sorry that so much of how I proceed when I teach is exposed here in these long pauses, and how committed I am not to speak until I get the prompt I'm waiting for. There it is, part of it. Here's the poem. He's going to refer to a burn, and that means a stream. This darksome burn, horseback brown, His roll rock high road roaring down. In coop and in comb the fleece of his foam flutes, and low to the lake falls home. Beautiful sounds to it. A wind puff bonnet of fawn froth turns and twindles over the broth of a pool so pitch black, fell frowning. It rounds and rounds despair, drowning. Decked with dew, dappled with dew are the groins of the braes that the brook treads through. Wiry heath packs flitches of fern, the bead bonny ash that sits over the burn. And the last stanza. What would the world be once bereft of wet and of wildness? Let them be left, oh, let them be left, wildness and wet. Long live the weeds and the wilderness yet. Any reaction to what you just heard?
So Rick, I would say it's not, I'm not going to make a deep comment, but what I'm going to say is that I just noticed in the two poems, I wish you could just read more poems because you read him beautifully and with such heart. But in the two that you've read, the last stanza in both are just stunning. It was like the poem kind of goes along, la da da, and then the last stanza is just sublimely beautiful in both. There's like, he takes a turn. I mean, I don't know if that's the way he always did his poetry, but it's really quite amazing.
Mark, thank you. It's true. Absolutely takes your breath away.
There's a lot of alliteration in his poems.
So do you know, so everyone, do you know what alliteration means from your study? Carol, do you want to?
It was the way that my sister always talked, Rick. I mean,
So alliteration
we always called her illiterate.
You guys can settle that one later. I know it's a delicate topic. So alliteration has to do with the way consonants repeat. It's something he learned from the Welsh. It's called just the consonant chiming is the Welsh word. The beautiful rhythmic sound of the consonants, the same ones. And the bead bonny ash that sits over the burn. Hear it there. Assonance has to do with echoing in the vowel structures. The vowel sounds are the same in a line. Beautiful, he was a master at that. This darksome burn, so he finds himself by the edge of the stream and he's watching it rush down through the rocks from up there, down through this vegetative cut in the earth as a stream will do on its way down to the Loch Lomond. This darksome burn, the stream, that's the Scottish word for a stream, horseback brown. So the water's brown. So it suggests runoff, like maybe it's in the early spring. His roll rock high road roaring down. Hear the roar, the alliteration there. His roll rock high road roaring down. Beautiful sound as it works through the big rocks, as it roars through those rocks and echoes. In coop And in cum, there's the echoing of the vowels. So a coop is a narrow place, a constrained place. And a cum is the name of a valley. In coop and in cum, the fleece of his foam flutes, and low to the lake falls home. So he wants you in the sound of the words to hear the sound of the water as he heard the music of it, and try to put that in the words so that you hear the sound the water makes as it cuts its way down through the stones, roaring by the rocks and dropping down. It's a brown color, horseback brown. In the next, a wind puff bonnet. So over the top of the rapids, there's some steam, and it strikes him as kind of a hat made of beautiful air that sits on top. So he's giving you impressions. Now, these impressions is what are inscapes. It's these insights, these moments that he catches that reminds him of that. And he tries to put a word on exactly what he saw at that moment. The whole thing is filled with these inscape moments, these discrete moments of clarity, the overall effect of which is the meaning of the stream that he's by. Of fawn froth. So fawn is that lighter colored brown. So the water is a dark brown, but when it moves up into the rapids and where there's white, it makes the brown lighter. So he calls that fawn froth. But in the process, by using the word fawn, it's not just the color, but you get a sense of fawns that dance and gambol and jump around like little ones do. You see how much he's packing in to the beautiful language. It turns, in other words, the froth turns and twindles. What a beautiful word that is. Twindle is a word he invented, and he's good at this. And it seems to be twist and dwindle. So he put it together to create twindle. So the foam he's watching starts to swirl, and it twists, but as it moves away from the rapid, it dwindles and starts to sink into the water. And he says it in one word, dwindles.
Brown and white.
Over the broth. So it's broth that's brown. It's swirling like you're stirring it in a pot. And as he's watching it, suddenly it becomes darker, the thought he has, because the spinning has a whirlpool effect. And that beautiful fawn froth is going to die and get sucked down into the whirlpool and disappear. So there was something about that caught him and put him in darker thought. And we wonder at that point in the poem, oh, Gerard, come back. Where did that joyful self go? You're catching a lot of his personality here. He could be so joyous and then overwhelmed with a kind of dark thing, struggled with, sensitivity. It rounds and rounds despair to drowning. And we thought, oh my goodness, what is the next stanza going to do? Then he pops right back out. Listen to the beauty of these sounds. Degged with dew. Deg, which means to sprinkle with water. Degged with dew, dappled with dew. There's that alliteration. Are the groins of the braes that the brook treads through. Wiry heath packs. So he means the heath that grows around the edge, a kind of plant, low-lying shrub, but it's dense, so he calls them heath packs, invents a word. Wiry heath packs, flitches of fern, gorgeous. And the bead bonny ash that sits over the burn. So he's been looking down at the ground, then he looks up at this beautiful ash tree. And it's the spring because the beads are the seeds before they bloom into the leaves that sits over the burn. Any comments?
Well, Rick, something I was wondering about, so Hopkins is writing about 150 years ago or so. And I'm hearing a new word these days, new to me at least, appearing these days among poets and environmentalists and sometimes parts of the Christian community. The word is rewilding, the rewilding of things. And I heard the word wild coming out for a while, for about 5 to 7 years, but now this rewilding, and I wonder if it's got a connection. I wonder if that's something that Hopkins poetry would introduce us to, or I wonder about that intersection. Just a question.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what rewilding means?
I don't think I have a hunch, but no, I'm not going to offer a definition.
Yeah. So what rewilding means, it's a kind of movement that says we have taken a beautiful natural world and exploited it. Let's repair it. Let's try to put it back to the way it was, because it was beautiful once. So rewilding is an effort to replant where things have died, to allow things to grow back. And before it's too late is kind of the idea behind the rewilding thing. So Hopkins, remember, was, living during the Industrial Revolution, in which man's relation to the land was dramatically shifting. And moving toward the world of the machine and the factory and things like that. So Hopkins, as a poet, like the Romantics before him, but with a much more spiritual, he was a deeply committed Catholic with a deep kind of mystical connection to the Eucharist. When he talks about the world is charged with grandeur of God, that the world is meant in the natural world to carry the very glory of God for us to be able to encounter it. And if we just mow it down and don't even pay attention to it, we've lost something so essential that God has built and made so beautiful for us to care for. It's his garden, not ours. Is kind of what Hopkins felt just great pain, because he felt such a connection to the beauty of the natural world. So anyway, I don't know what rewilding is about, as what's in the heart of the people that are promoting it, but I do understand when people say, what if we just let that? I remember I used to think this as an Oregon or Pacific Northwest person in relation to Californians, to speak in this grand generalization. One difference I noticed between our psychic makeup is that in the Pacific Northwest, we had all this open space, and the Californians would speak of it as undeveloped space. And in the Pacific Northwest, we called it wilderness. Just a completely different understanding. For Pacific Northwest, it runs deep. The wilderness is a thing. It's a beautiful treasure. Protect it, enjoy it, walk in it, be affected by it. It's not undeveloped land. So maybe there's something of the rewilding. It's trying to capture, and we put stuff back before we lose it completely. Get so out of touch that we can't recover anything. Okay. It's 7 o'clock. Let's just, I want to turn it back to Mary because it's our custom to pause. And when we come back, I'll read you another poem. Mary.
All right, let's just take a quick pause, maybe 5 minutes. Stand up, get another drink, stretch your legs, and we'll come back at 7:06. Or we'll stay here and you can chat as well. So
Okay.
I'll let you know when it's time to come back. Just take a quick 5 minutes.
Rick,
Yes. Hi, Carol. I'm so glad to see you. And
Yeah.
Rick, hello there.
Greetings.
one of the things this poem reminds me of a little bit is a psalm. The Psalms, which started out with, praise and thanksgiving and then despair, the
Yeah.
world is after me. But like the last stanza of this poem, I trust you, God. I have confidence that you will save me. And so I see this in that poem, that there's this pattern.
Yeah.
Um, it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful.
One of the things I haven't done well tonight, Carol, is how for Hopkins to seek the natural world and to describe it generously, getting exact words to describe what a close and loving observation of it gave him to see, was for him an act of worship. It
Mm.
was prayer.
Yeah.
And so when he would write these poems, you can feel the movement of prayer from lament to praise, to fear, to loss, to hope. It's
Mhm.
actually, you feel a person praying, and he's helped in the poems to pray what he's tracking, what he's aware of. So I think your association with the Psalms is very appropriate, because I think they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
There's a line in one of the Psalms about I forget, it says it so much better in the Psalm, but I'm concerned. I have many concerns. I think I will pick up my pen and see if I can find out what I mean, what I'm feeling.
Rick, all the images of the natural realm feel so Edenic. They're so original and fresh and not harnessed or duplicated yet. And in the last poem, it just really struck me, the word shod.
Yeah.
Because that felt like the human was being considered or being described as a beast of burden.
Yes.
And kind of abased, and forgetting that we were created to be part of this Edenic world. So there's just something very tragic in what I feel from his writing.
And you, in catching that, Barb, you are right. He mourned that. He was trained as a Jesuit that we are created to praise, reverence, and serve God. This is the means by which we save our soul. It's how a famous line from the spiritual exercise goes. And so if you take a human being and you turn them into beast of burden, and all they do is just work, covered with dirt and just plowing in. Remember, we're speaking at a certain level of generalization that takes nothing away from people who work hard and pour out their life and make things. But I don't want to push this too far. What he means is that when you take that essential vocation of a human being, is we exist to look up, to praise, to reverence, to have stewardship over the world, to care for each other and all levels of being that are underneath us. You take that from a human being and you've wrecked something in that human. Tom Doyle, what were you?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. One of the things I was wondering, you began with a biographical sketch, and he grew up in the context of a church and faith, but this won't describe it perfectly, but I think you described it as that he found the church to be hollow, or dense. And when you read the first poem and the second as well, to me, it's almost like a person who has discovered sacrament, right? That you could look at bread and you might see looked at what's the word used for that in its sort of essence is not just
inscape.
bread, but it's the inscape. That's the word I'm looking for. Is that it's almost he talks about these plain things, but I don't know. And the last thing I'll say, it's somewhat disconnected. I was walking in the rain, but when you're reading the first poem, I was thinking of Jimmy Cliff's song, I can see clearly now the rain is gone, right? It's almost like this sense that he's had a chance to see clearly, right? And he gets glimpses of clarity of what is really there. So if you get a chance at some point in time to talk about maybe how it's connected to faith and church and sacrament through his poetry, I'd be interested. Others might not be, but I'd be interested in hearing more.
Thank you. Okay. Are
All
we
right.
timed?
Let's go ahead and come back together and we'll continue on with some more poetry.
Another one of his sonnets. And Mark, you referred to how he starts from minute and careful observation. Things he sees, flashes of insight, a place where the grandeur of God flashes out and catches him, both in things he sees and things he hears. And when those things make themselves available and reveal the grandeur that's in them as if it flashes, and we catch that. Hopkins calls that selving, the unique selfness of a particular thing, a bird, a stone, a tree, a stream, fawn froth, a whirlpool. The moment it reveals what it is, he calls that selving. The inner truth of that thing is expressed. This poem is about that. So I'll just read it. As kingfishers, kind of bird, a beautiful bird. As kingfishers catch fire, as it's diving, the sun hits the beautiful color on their wings. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring. Beautiful. The sound a particular stone makes echoes as if it's saying, that's me. I'm here. Do you hear my voice? Like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Catch it? So you take a string and pluck it, and it sounds. It says what it is. Each hung bell's bow swung, gong, finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same. Deals out. Here's the sacramental principle that Tom Doyle was talking about at the half. Deals out that being indoors, each one dwells. In order to know a thing, it has to express externally the inner world. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors, each one dwells. a hidden mystery. Selves goes itself. Myself, it speaks and spells. Isn't that beautiful? Do you hear? It's like the gonging of a bell. Selves goes itself. Myself, it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me. For that I came. I say more. Now he jumps to a completely different level. The just man justices. So like a bell when it rings has a unique sound that flings out its name. That's who I am. Do you hear me? When the clapper just hangs there, you have no idea what it is. But when it hits the bell, there it is. Selves goes itself. So he says, I say more. The just man justices. That's how you tell a just man. The justice they do is the self, like the sound they make in the world. Keeps grace that keeps all his goings graces. The just man moves gracefully in the world. That's the self that a just person is. Acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is. Christ. Oh my God, he couldn't be trying harder to say something so beautiful. That each of us, when we find our true voice, not a fake one, not trying to sound like someone else, not trying to act like someone else, not like be like someone else, to be what we each are. When we're true to that, what people receive out there, the self that is expressed, the sacramental. So the sacramental, what is hidden is revealed. The outward sign of an invisible reality. When we are just, when we move gracefully, people don't just pick up Rick or Tom or Ray or Barb. They encounter Christ in us. Do you see? Maybe you've run across this in your religious experience. I certainly have in mine. Where people try to look like Christ, but they aren't actually Christ-like. Because they haven't found their true voice. Either, I don't know why that gets lost. I say more. The just man justices keeps grace that keeps all his goings graces. Acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is. Christ. An image and likeness. And now here it finishes so beautifully. For Christ plays in 10,000 places. Lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his. To the Father, through the features of men's faces. Isn't that just transcendently beautiful?
My favorite of all of his poems.
Mark, isn't that true?
You know,
I'm going to read that one more time. I mean, the first part is gorgeous. Bells and stones. You finally hear what they are when they sound self. This is me. I say more. The just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes, not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. Any comments?
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh boy, there's so much there. Uh, the thing of being what you're supposed to be is the hardest thing to do. It's simple, but you have to let it out, find it and then let it out. And it reminded me, I mean, several gospel verses, but don't keep your light under a basket. Let it shine. Many times, we've been told those things, and it's really true. Oh boy, that was awesome.
Isn't
love
it? Thank you. I mean, just to be able to say and to show it on your face, what an awesome experience. I was telling my sister Carol break that Hopkins, when he's writing the poem, one of the things that's so characteristic about him and makes him so different from the romantic poets who came before him and were during his time, who also were paying attention to nature. Hopkins was an intensely concerned. He was praying when he wrote these. He was sharing an experience of God with you and me. That when we feel awe at the words he chooses and how he evokes this, that we join him in praising. We are brought to prayer. Let me read you another one, since they're all written about the same time. And this will be the last one that we'll read, I think. Another short sonnet. In fact, it's called a curtal sonnet because he deliberately clipped it. And the setting for this is probably this. When I was brought up and my older siblings know this, because that was their experience too. When we were brought up by the sisters, and I think, Carol, do you remember, were they Dominicans or Franciscans at St. Augustine? I can't hear you.
You're saying Franciscans.
Franciscan.
So they were the Franciscan sisters. Well, one of the things they taught us whenever we did our homework is at the top of our page, before we wrote our homework assignment, is we were supposed to put JMJ at the top. And that was supposed to be Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And it was just a habit that we taught little kids every time you do your homework. And so every homework, when it was turned in, had JMJ across the top. Well, the Jesuits, because we're cussed and we want to do it our special way, didn't do it that way. So what we taught were a couple of lines from St. Ignatius, two mottos that were associated with St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. The first is a Latin tag. They both are Latin. Ad maiorem Dei gloria.
Yeah.
And taking the first letter of each of those four words creates AMDG. And so when schoolboys were taught over the centuries in Jesuit schools, to always put at the top of your page AMDG. And what it meant is that everything that follows, the idea is I'm doing this to make it more obvious rather than less obvious that God really exists and is glorious. May what I do be to the greater glory, not of me trying to get an A over that wretch who's always gets an A ahead of me. It gets out of that world completely. No, may what I do make it more obvious through the work I share now in my homework that God is more real than we thought. It's glorious. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam. That's at the top of the page. And then when you finish your homework assignment, you would write LDS, and that stood for Laus Deo Semper. And that meant praise be to God always. That was the closing. These are neat habits that you teach kids long before they know Latin, but it builds an understanding that I've done the best I can, and so now praise God in this work that I've tried to do. Okay? It seems this sonnet was probably built reflecting on those two things that Hopkins as a boy learned to put on his pages. So it goes like this. Glory be to God for dappled things. Glory be to God for dappled things. For skies of couple color as a brinded cow. Brinded meaning having stripes of different hues of color, of the same color but different hues, striped. For rose moles all in stipple on trout that swim. Fresh fire coal, chestnut falls, finch's wings. You see inscapes, just flashes of perception, capturing each of these distinct things and trying to find just the right word to capture what he sees. Landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow and plow, and all trades their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim. He fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. Did you hear the AMDG at the beginning? Glory be to God for that. And closes, Laus Deo Semper. Praise him. It's like he's taking his old grade school work and building this beautiful development of perception. That's a homework assignment worth saving right there. So filled out with understanding. And did you notice some of the things, I'll just leave a thought and I'm going to ask you what you thought. How God, who is the source of all beauty and is unified internally, beautifully himself, like he said in the previous thing, instead of a bell tolling and it flings out its name, or a stone falls over rim and roundy well, and it creates that sound as it comes up through the tube of the well, sound of itself. It speaks and spells. God flings out broad his name by creating a universe. It's just astounding. The whole thing says, myself, it speaks and spells. For this I came. and for all the unity of God, that he's able to create things genuinely different from himself that are disunified. All things counter, going in different directions. Original, brand new, unexpected, spare, extra, strange. And all of it is held when we can see in a single inscape how they all reflect the self of God. Any comments?
Yeah, Gary.
Thank you. I just think that's just such a glorious end to our time together, because it sort of really ties back to the very first poem. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. And as I read that, I was hit by what must be a deliberate ambiguity when he goes on to say, it will flame out. What is the it? The grandeur of God or the world? Well, of course, the world is going to flame out, but it gathers to a greatness. And then he has this little intervening place where the humans are treading, and man smudge and smells and so on. But then this glorious last verse, which is just like the last poem. For all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. I mean, it's like the conclusion of that poem seems to capture these, charged with the individualistic spirit and beauty of the created glory of God in the last poem. So I just wanted to tie those together that hit me that way.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. The image that you said there about the brown brink eastward springs.
Yeah.
There's a meaning of springs that we don't understand. And you have to know that with Hopkins. You have to investigate deep into the word, because he's often using it in a different way than we would. So we think of springs like bouncing out of the east, but I've never seen the sun do that. And I've never seen a dawn spring. So I said, I'm missing something. Well, one of the meanings or early meanings of the verb to spring means to blush. So it has to do with the color of the sky. And the image that's so beautiful is that the natural world is like a face, like the human face, that when it looks on the Holy Spirit, that suddenly has descended with bright wings, like in Genesis, and the Spirit of God hovered over the water. It's a creation moment. When the Holy Spirit comes, the world, as if a face, a human face, blushes.
Oh my.
Isn't that gorgeous?
It's exquisite.
In the presence of something so beautiful, what can we do but feel our limitation and blush?
I love the word dappled, because I remember how beautiful that was at, like, say, Priest Lake. You'd be sitting there at a little creek and the sun would be dappled, and you would see the light be on certain objects for a short time, and you'd be watching it, and then it would change because the light would move. And so the whole puzzle sort of changed. And that was always a really spiritual moment for me, that dappledness, how he describes that.
And the word he uses for that, Carol, we didn't get to it, is you inscaped, you caught it, You didn't miss it. The effect in you, he calls stress. And the word he uses is in stress. So it's your engagement with something you have perceived. And that in stress, the hold it has on you, has remained even to you, now 93 years old. And that was probably back when you were only 16 by the Soldier Creek. Isn't that amazing? The in stress, that's the connection we have to the inscape. The felt experience of the insight in us is what he calls the in stress. And you just shared an in stress, as you did, Gary, also expressing the awe and beauty you felt. We have to stop because it's time, and stay very careful about that. I want to just say as I stop here, I don't recall where I've ever had such an experience of pause in the middle of a time with people. I'll think long on what happened there tonight, but I'm grateful for you because I don't mind stillness, and I do mind when people just talk because they have words and not because they're being led to say what they're supposed to say. I lost somehow my ability to hear them. And so what I shared with you was silence. And I appreciate when you just let that happen. You might have thought I was having a stroke. No, I was waiting for a prompting that I couldn't hear. And I won't speak unless I hear it. Something very deep. But you had to endure that, and I appreciate that you hung in there and showed me grace. Even if you didn't, you don't have to tell me you didn't show me. I'll just assume you did. So I love being with you and sharing this poet that is so beautiful, the gift you gave to us. Mary, back to you.
Thank you, Father Ganz, and thank you all for being with us this evening. This was the final class of this Faber Sessions series, and we kind of operate on like a school year frame. And so when we enter into the summer, we pause from regular gatherings as people are often busy with summer plans, and we just take that break in those activities as we get ready for what the coming activities will be starting back in the fall. So we do have a couple more May gatherings before summertime. And that is this Saturday, actually, we have a mother's retreat here in Portland. And that's for mothers of all ages and will be led by Tara Ludwig, who's the spiritual director here at the Institute. And that information is on our website. And then our final night school class of the night school current series will be the Tuesday before Memorial Day. And that is here in Portland, but also we have the live stream option. So I'll include those details in a follow-up email that I'll send out tomorrow with some additional resources from tonight's class. So thank you again for being here. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye as you leave, and we will see you soon. Have a good night.
Hey, Mary, thank you. And by the way, the things that you say about, it's true that we don't do the night school and the Faber sessions. We do other things that go on during the summer, but just not those two. Anyway, nice to be with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rick.
Well,
Rick.
yeah.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye
Bye.
now.
Good night.
Good night.
So happy to have you.
Yeah. Hey, Carol.
Yeah, I'd love to pray for your cousin. Would you share her first name?
Yeah, her name's Laura, and she's a couple years younger than me and has kids the same age as my kids. So kind of just got that news today.
It's really efficacious, and thank you for sharing that with us.
You're
Well-
lucky if you have Carol praying for you. So that's a good one.
Yes, thank you, Carol.
God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you all. Good to see you, Rick.
Berta, friend.
Good to see you, Tom.
Hey, Tom.